Hi, everybody. My name is Paul. I'm one of the librarians at Thomas Crane Public Library, and I'm here today with Sean Murphy, who is hosting our program on March 9th called The Historical Significance of St. Patrick. And Sean's one of our frequent presenters who always has interesting programs, and everybody learns something when they attend one of Sean's programs. So we're all excited to learn more about St. Patrick. Sean, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. It's kind of snowy down here, and we're still feeling the effects of the virus. Although fortunately, it hasn't hit our family, so we're
that's
we're
wonderful.
lucky.
Yeah, mine's been unscathed so far as well, so that's always fortunate. And you know what? I was thinking when thinking about this program, honestly, one of the bright spots is your wonderful programs that you've done on the history, culture, and people of Ireland over the past few months. And I think a lot of our library community really looks forward to it. So I think they'll look forward to this one as well. Maybe you can give us a little idea of, although the title, The Historical Significance of St. Patrick's, pretty clear. Maybe you could give us more of an idea of what we're going to cover.
Great. Well, again, what people generally know about St. Patrick, comes from a very standard, conservative, Christian narrative, which was developed about 300 years after St. Patrick had died. So they created the kind of origin myth, of Christianity in Ireland. And at another level, apart from kind of sanitizing certain things, there was a tendency at the time to try in those days to be a saint. There had to be reference to the Old Testament, so they had to take out something that showed that you were at the level of the most elevated of the people in the Old Testament.
Wow.
And that ranged from everything, including dying at 120, because apparently Moses died when he was 120. So that would be used as a way of indicating, greatness. But anyway, what I'm going to be going over will be different from what most people have heard before. I'm giving the historical perspective, which you don't get in a storyline, because really what you get most of the time is just a storyline. Generally one that's either a romanticized Irish version or a Christian narrative. So what I'd be trying to do, as any of you who've heard my history, I'm trying to put it into historical context. And we'll be looking at the major events of the period. And they included the Roman Empire. There was two aspects of that. One was the beginning of the end around the time that St. Patrick was alive, for the empire went into steep decline. But also, around his time, the Christian church in Rome was the one that was adopted as the official religion of the Roman Empire. And that's why it became known as the Roman Church. And then when it was adopted as well, the emperor at the time described it as universal, and Catholic is just a word for universal. What it meant for other Christians was if you weren't part of that one church, and there was numerous others, including about three in Rome itself, you were going to end up being persecuted. So they called it the Nicene Christianity for quite a while, because in 325, Constantine, who was the one who was the Roman emperor, who decriminalized and put in place legislation that gave Christianity its freedom to thrive. That was a big part of it, the integration, the way that Christianity merged. There was a lot of opposition to it, because a lot of people within the Roman Empire wanted to hold on to their, pagan credentials. But the issue was Constantine wanted to become emperor of the Roman Empire. He was based in Britain, and at the time, Britain and the neighboring countries in Gaul were Christian. So he wanted to challenge. That meant he had to fight somewhere in Europe against his leading contender, and he needed an army. And at the time, he was coming from areas that were Christianized. In the past, there had been, particularly, say, in the Jewish wars, the Christians refused to fight. They didn't see that as something they should do. And that was a kind of a tradition within Christianity. But because of the persecutions, particularly from the year 250 to 300, when Constantine, and this is something you won't hear too many people tell you, but the reality was Constantine needed an army, and people were only prepared, to fight with him on condition that he do something about the persecution of Christians. So he made promises that if he won his battles, that he would do something. He won the battles, and he had to do it. Now, again, he then, when he died, it continued as a dynasty. So the Christianity and what he had done was continually challenged over the next 60, 70, 80 years. But even in spite of some emperors coming in who reverted back to paganism, Christianity had got a foothold, and it remained, there. And then in the 390s, there was one major military victory, military battle, which essentially decided whether Christianity was the way forward or a reversion back to paganism. And the Christians won that battle. So that and that battle happened probably around the time that Patrick would have been, a first grader. And so that's part of it, that connection between Christianity and Rome, because in terms of Ireland was never part of the Roman Empire. So a lot of people are confused. Why did the Christian Church come to Ireland? Because when the Roman Empire took over Christianity, essentially what it was going to be was a top-down exercise, and it was going to be limited to the strong areas within the old Roman Empire. There was no sense that they would go beyond that. Because they believed their own kind of lunatic stories about savages. So that was that kind of coming together of the Roman Empire and Christianity is one part. But then with the dissolution of the Roman Empire, that was where major events started to happen. Because what happened then was around the beginning of the 5th century. There had been sporadic events in the past, but now it became a monumental. In fact, in history, it's known as the third great historic migration of the old days. So you had forces coming across, like the Huns from the east, and they were pushing Germanic tribes and other tribes in the east and northern Europe, and they were being forced westwards. And then they came into places like Gaul, which would be, modern day France and some of the Low Countries. And all of the Christians that were there got displaced. And a huge number of those ended up in Ireland because it was perceived as a safe place to go. Now, at the time as well, what the Irish were doing in order to prevent the Romans invading Ireland, their strategy was to attack the Romans on Britain. And to do that in conjunction with both the native people of Scotland, as well as some of the European tribes like the Angles and and a few of the other. And they had done that successfully. The result of that was that Rome never managed to get to Ireland because Ireland kept them busy elsewhere. So around the end of the 4th century, there was the Irish were basically destabilizing the west coast of Britain. So they were attacking Roman villages, Roman communities, because by this stage, the Romans were in control of England at this stage, for about 300 years. And they attacked one village, and they took, on that raid, apparently they took possibly 2,000 or 3,000 people, brought them back to Ireland. One of those was a guy who turned out to be St. Patrick. So that was his first, because he's a Romano-Briton. He came from a very, very wealthy family from a Romano-British background. He came to Ireland and stayed there for 6 years. And it would appear that as a result of help from an underground network for freeing slaves, that he managed to get away. And he got away on a boat that was bringing cargo heading for Rome, and the cargo was Irish wolfhounds, because Irish wolfhounds were a great favourite among the elites, particularly in Rome, but in other parts of Europe as well. And so anyway, after a lot of trials and tribulations, he got back to his own hometown, then decided that he wanted to, to basically become a priest or to work within the church. And he wanted to come back to Ireland. Now, he ran into a number of problems because at that time, to be a priest, you needed pretty high education. Now, because he was from the ages of 16 to 22, he had missed out on the equivalent of high school and college. So his abilities in Rome, his Latin was very, very basic, and other skills, oratorical skills and debating skills and all sorts of other skills that priests and bishops would have been trained in. He never got trained. So that was an uphill struggle for him. Initially, they were only making him a brother. They weren't going to make him a priest at all. But he persisted. And at one point, anyway, he managed to convince somebody that he would be the man for Ireland. Now, the issue with Ireland at this stage was there were a lot of Christians in Ireland. A lot of them were slaves who had been captured as a result of those raids, both on Britain and on Western Europe. There were also, as a result of the Great Migration, there were large numbers of people who were refugees and asylum seekers. So the problem for Rome now was that there was a gathering on this island of Ireland of lots of Christians, and there were still internal battles going on within the Christian church about which set of beliefs were the right ones. And the Roman church had quite a few, competitors, if you like. So Patrick was sent to Ireland with the mission to ensure that the Christian community in Ireland developed and formed an allegiance with Rome. That was his job. And initially it was to prevent the Christians that were there going for another brand of Christianity, because a couple of years before St. Patrick came to Ireland, the church had sent some of its most senior members to Britain to sort out the church in Britain, and it kind of gave them an ultimatum: you're going to have to toe the line with us, and any of you that don't, we're expelling you. And quite a number of those that got expelled came to Ireland. And so between that and then the issue then was there were a lot of Christians in Ireland who were being kidnapped, who weren't being ministered to. So they didn't have control over how it developed and didn't have control over what happened when all of these people from different parts got together and started to debate and discuss around the differences between the different Christian groups. So they wanted to control that, and that's why he came. Now he was not favoured by the British, authorities. They didn't want him coming in at all. But because of the agreement with Rome, he had to get permission by the British authorities to come in. It was only a formality because the ecclesiastical authorities in Britain, they were getting something out of giving permission for him to come. At one level, they were getting recognition. And it was also, we've done you a favour, so we'll need a return on that at some point in the future. Also, there wouldn't have been any people within the church in England who would have wanted to touch Ireland. So there was no kind of rush of volunteers, to compete with Patrick.
So there was a mayor, almost like a power vacuum, and he was able to step in and fill it.
Yeah, he was able to fill it, and partly because he wanted to go there, and he made that clear. That was his special devotion to get back to Ireland. He'd just an attachment to Ireland, and obviously when he was in Ireland, he'd learned the language, he'd learned the customs, the traditions, and he knew people, in Ireland, and he knew the way things got done in Ireland. And so he came to Ireland. He would have been probably mid to late 40s, and he brought members of his family with him. Everywhere he went, he would have an entourage of about 100 people, and essentially they started off a mini building boom in Ireland. In the 25 years that he was there, there were 300 or 400 churches built and other institutions built. There were thousands of people that were ordained. Probably hundreds of thousands who were baptized. So there was a lot of work going on. As well as that, you had all these people who were coming in from Europe. You had the asylum seekers, many of them who were wealthy and were skilled. And when they came in, they were able to use that wealth, to work in Ireland. And the next 3 or 4 centuries was what's known in Ireland as when Ireland was known as the island of saints and scholars, because the rest of Europe was in what's euphemistically called the Dark Ages, but Ireland was having a renaissance on the back of all of these skills and resources that people who arrived in Ireland at that time brought. And that continued until the Viking invasions in the 8th century. So I'm going to be trying to explain how all of those factors came in. Then I'm going to explain a little bit about him and how his mission worked out. At one level, it was very successful. We still don't really know how he managed to be as successful as he was, but the evidence is there that he was. Now, it's an exaggeration to say that by the time that he died, everybody in Ireland was Christian. They weren't. It took quite a long time. Despite the fact that he was from Rome, a lot of the traditions in Ireland, Christian traditions, were non-Roman because of you remember in Ireland, there were Celtic peoples. Mm-hmm. And a lot of those Celtic peoples over the previous 1,000 years had been fighting the Romans in Europe, and a lot of them ended up in Ireland because they had been defeated in their own territory in Europe and had been forced into either subjection to accept Roman rule and stay where you were, or die on the battlefield, or you could emigrate or migrate. So a lot of those arrived in Ireland. So they knew Rome well, and they had no desire to have anything to do with it. So that was a disadvantage for a church based in Rome, because the Irish didn't want to touch it. And the early tradition in Rome was around people like St. James and St. John, who had built up their work in Africa and Asia. So simple things like the dating of Easter, which was a huge division within the church. The Irish did not go until the 8th or 9th century with the Roman way on that. Also the tonsure, the haircut, the Irish did not go with that. Setting up dioceses, the Irish did not go with that. So you ended up with what was essentially an Irish solution to an Irish problem. You ended up with geographic communities that essentially mirrored the existing Celtic communities in Ireland. So if you managed to convince a clan, to become Christian, well, then they had to have their own buildings, they had to have their own priests, and it had to be done the Irish way. It had to be because under the old system, the Druids and all of the other professionals within the old Celtic society, all those positions were hereditary. So priests then had to be hereditary, and of course celibacy didn't work in Ireland. Mm-hmm. And also other issues around who you could marry, because in a clan the church wanted and tried to enforce that you couldn't marry anybody. You had to go beyond your third cousin, but in clan society that means you can't marry anybody within your clan, literally. Or the pool that would be available as very, very few. The problem then is that would mean leading up to the breaking of the clan, because it would force people to start marrying into other clans. And that had all sorts of consequences, in terms of the clan holding on to its land. Because if people started to marry members of another clan, well, who's going to get the land when one or other or both, died? So it ended up anyway that every clan had its own, literally, monastery, had its own set of priests. And that worked out well. Now, in the end, for St. Patrick, the couple of things happened in his life. One was he had just managed to baptize a whole village on the northeast coast of Ireland, and he was only hours away from it when it was attacked by raiders from Britain, and they took away all of his new baptized people to the slave market. So he had a choice, because there was a lot of pressure on him. Irish people were looking at him and saying, "What's he going to do about this?" And he knew he had to do something. He knew that if he was to go by the protocol, which would have been to contact the bishops in England, in the parish where the king, because there was a guy called Coroticus who was the king who led this raid. But he knew that if he contacted them, first of all, it would take too long to get that done. And by that time, all of these people would have been sold off to being at far ends of the earth or dead. Also, he figured that probably the church in that area relied upon Caroticus for their own security and personal protection. So he didn't. What he did was he wrote a letter. It's called the Letter to the Soldiers of Caroticus. So it was a plea for them, the soldiers, who were all Christian, because at this stage it was Christian Britain, and Caroticus was a Christian. So he was coming across as Christian to Christian, basically saying to them, this is a bad thing that you've done. You need to rectify it, and you need to release these people and send them back. And pointing out that he had just baptized them. So the people you've taken away as slaves, they weren't pagans. These were freshly baptized people. So you should honor that and return them. Now, the problem with this then was that the ecclesiastical authorities in England did not like that. As far as they were concerned, the protocol at the time, was that you would not interfere directly. You would go and through the proper channels, if you like. So they held that against him. And also by this stage, it was obvious that his mission in Ireland was very, very successful. And at this stage, essentially, they wanted their share of the loot, the money that was being collected. Because you had, for instance, the two groups of people in Ireland that took to Christianity straight away, obviously were slaves, and the other was women. And a lot of women, particularly women from noble, families in Ireland who were wealthy, they were bringing him gifts. So the English were not happy that they weren't getting the share. Now, when he was challenged about it, he said that he, refused to take anything from them. But that's not what the ecclesiastical authorities in England wanted to hear. They wanted him to take it and split it with them. So a number of occasions they sent over people, and there's a beautiful scene in one of the movies about St. Patrick, because in England they had this name from, they used to call him a filthy little pig keeper. So there's a scene in this movie that was made in 1999 where these couple arrived from England, all dressed up, and there's Patrick out, and he's cleaning out a pig pen. And he turns around and he sees them, and they said something like, we're here from England. He says, oh, wonderful, wonderful. At last they've sent me somebody to help me. Oh, no. We're here to do an audit. So he sent them on their way. So then they began a campaign against him. They wanted to remove him, from Ireland. So they started this kind of slanderous campaign against him. And then when he was in his early 70s, they sent, they requested him to come back, for a review. And he knew, as we all know, that's not good. So he refused to go. And what he did was he wrote his second, the second work that we have from him, which was his response. It's called a Confessio. And essentially, he wrote to explain and justify his work in Ireland, and to take on all of the accusations that were being made against him, and to set the record straight from his point of view. So it's a great read, so the course will look at all of that. The presentation that I give, will introduce people to this. I have a 4-week course that I'll be doing in March that covers all of this over 4, separate weeks. And I'll be explaining that, on the night. I'll be showing people how they can get involved in those courses if they wish. But this will, it will give you a sense of what the world was like at that time, what Patrick was like, what the people around him. And also I'll be talking about, some of his sisters and brothers and nephews, and going into detail because, we have plenty of information about them, but they generally are not talked about. But I will be talking about them.
It sounds amazing. Honestly, as you were explaining it, there's so many different little stories that could branch off from there that would just be fascinating on their own. And so I think everybody's got a lot to look forward to with this program coming up. Thank you very much, Sean. I really appreciate your time today. We look forward to seeing you and everybody else on March the 9th at 7 p.m. at thomascranelibrary.org.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Talk to you soon.